I'm David Reeves, host of the TV show Creation in the 21st Century on TBN. Each week we talk about breaking discoveries in science which reveal that our Creator, the God of the Bible, has left a pattern of His fingerprints throughout the universe. Check us out and sign up for email updates at davidreeves.com. Subscribe to our free monthly magazine and like us on Facebook for weekly inspiration and education regarding science and the Bible. Let's look at the incredible cell. You have trillions of them in your body right now. We'll find out how they work and what that means about our origin right now on Wonders Without Number. Welcome to Wonders Without Number. I'm David Reeves, and today we want to inform and inspire you regarding the wonders we find all around us. An infinite number of wonders that point us directly to our Creator, the God of the Bible. Now, you're no accident. I want you to know that you are special, that you were created in God's own image, that Jesus Christ was and is that Creator, and that He has a plan for your life. Now, as intelligent humans, we've researched problems in our genetic sequence, and what we've realized is that we may be in trouble if life goes on for a very long time. In fact, we would be in big trouble if life is as old as many evolutionists have claimed. Let's take a look right now. Why should you believe in creation and not evolution? I mean, scientifically speaking. Haven't we proven that evolution is a fact? Did you know that for every generation that passes, more and more mistakes are piling up in the human genome? This means that your DNA has more mistakes than your parents' DNA, which has more mistakes than their parents' DNA, which has more mistakes than their parents, which has, well, you get the point. These mistakes are caused by mutations, which are basically copying errors when DNA is replicated. Now, thankfully for us, most of these mutations have no noticeable effect. But even if we don't notice them, they're still there, corrupting our DNA. A conservative estimate says that 100 to 300 new mutations occur in human reproductive cells per individual per generation. Now, some numbers are as high as 1,000 new mutations per individual per generation. That's a lot of mistakes. Now, most people think that natural selection will get rid of these mutations. After all, isn't that its job? Well, it's not quite that easy. You see, natural selection can only select against mutations that have a noticeable and significant effect in the moment. If the mutation is neutral, or even if it's harmful but hasn't caused death or serious harm, natural selection won't get rid of it because it can't see it. This leads to what's known as genetic entropy. This means that each generation carries all the mutations of previous generations, plus its own new mutations. And with a high mutation rate, genetic entropy is increasing quickly. Actually, it's increasing so fast, there is no way humans have been on the planet for millions of years like evolution suggests. Our genetic code would be so burdened with mutations, we'd be such a mess that we'd be extinct. Our genetic code doesn't look like it's been mutating for even tens of thousands of years. Instead, it looks like it was incredibly well designed and has only been subject to the degrading influence of mutations for a short time. Now, what does this imply? It certainly fits with the biblical historical accounts that God created mankind about 6,000 years ago with a perfect genome. It wasn't until after sin entered the world that mutations began to corrupt our DNA, and there hasn't been enough time since to completely destroy our genome. Just one more scientific reason that you shouldn't believe in human evolution. It takes a lot of faith. I'm David Reeves. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. God's Word, once again, makes perfect sense when we compare it to the current research in science. But speaking of current research, I want to introduce a friend who's been on the cutting edge of new research. Now, Dr. Kevin Anderson received his PhD in microbiology. He taught graduate-level molecular biology and cell biology, and he's published numerous articles in technical journals. He's also the co-director of the Creation Research Society's eKinds project. That's a project investigating mechanisms for rapid speciation and diversification within a biblical creation model. So, what I want you to do now is join with me as we welcome Dr. Kevin Anderson. welcome to the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It is great to have you here. Now, before we jump into the topic, I just want to touch briefly on the iDino project because we're pretty excited about that.
Yes.
Basically, CRS, and you led the research team there.
Yes, right.
Looking for soft tissue inside dinosaur bones.
Correct.
Tell us just a little bit about that.
Now, this has actually been in the literature with various reports for several decades, but just kind of ignored. And then in 2005, there was a paper published in the journal Science that beautiful colored pictures really showing this is what we're finding in these dinosaur fossils. And so it started getting the attention of more and more of people in the scientific community. So the Creation Research Society started their own project to also study the presence of tissue in dinosaur fossils and the presence even of intact cells in dinosaur fossils.
Wow.
And so obviously now there becomes two different interpretations. One is the idea that somehow this has survived for tens of millions of years, don't know how, kind of strange, really defies everything we understand about tissue degradation and protein degradation. And the other, of course, is our position that this is clear evidence that these fossils aren't millions of years old.
Okay, that is so neat. That is quite an interesting project. But your specialty, you like the genetics, the biology of some of these things. And
the cell itself.
The cell itself.
Yes.
And so you're sort of getting down into the nitty-gritty of everything and how it functions. And give us a hint. What are we going to learn today?
What we're going to talk about is how the cell and the activity of the cell and what we understand about the genetics in the cell does not fit the popular view.
Okay.
It doesn't really fit what they're trying to tell us that it does.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to let you jump in.
Okay.
We're looking at Charles Darwin here, a major influencer.
Right. We recognize, starting with his Origin of Species, which he rewrote several times, you understand, okay, and then other people have contributed as well. We recognize that today, that's the popular view. Some kind of idea that life has evolved slowly through time and that trees were not always trees, they were something that evolved into a tree. Humans were not always humans, they were something that evolved into a human. You know, so we recognize that's the popular view.
Yes.
All right, so my challenge is that when Darwin and his contemporaries proposed these ideas initially, 150 years ago, they knew nothing about genetics.
Okay.
Now, when you know nothing about genetics, then that gives you free rein to say kind of anything, but it doesn't have to be based in reality. So Darwin, and again, not just him, but his contemporaries, they made a lot of assumptions because they didn't know how organisms had the features they had, why you have your hair color, why a dog has its hair color, why a cow looks like a cow and not a chimpanzee.
Yes.
They didn't know why. So they just made a lot of assumptions.
Okay.
The problem I would challenge is because they made a lot of assumptions, most of their assumptions were wrong. But yet what we have is this becomes the common reaction when creationists try to say, but those assumptions are wrong. And we get what I call the face.
Right.
How dare you challenge our assumptions? The reason I would say we get the face is because it's really kind of a way of trying to keep you from understanding that you're not allowed to challenge. You're not allowed to come up with an alternate explanation that somehow promotes God. And I would say, see, would you expect the world to say anything else? Many times as a creationist, I get chastised by other Christians that, you know, you're saying the science is wrong? No, I'm saying the scientific community is wrong, not the same thing.
Yes.
Would you expect a fallen world to say anything else? Do you think the fallen world is going to say, oh, look at all the evidence for a creator, therefore there must be a creator? Of course not. A fallen world's been trying to deny its creator the whole time. Through all of Earth history, we have been trying to deny our creator because that's part of our fallen sinful state.
Absolutely.
So it's not going to be a situation where you say, okay, raise your hand, popular vote wins. Remember, Jesus said, wide is the gate, and many are on it that go to destruction. So popular views aren't necessarily godly views. In fact, many times they're not godly views. So we need to get rid of this idea that somehow because evolution is the popular view, that makes it right.
And it is the same with science as well. Just because a scientific principle is considered true or real
Popular,
by the popular
right,
view
right,
does
exactly.
not mean that
Does
a few
not
years
make
down
it-
the road
yeah.
they're going to say that's the most ridiculous thing.
And
I've
in
ever heard."
fact, that has happened several times
Okay.
in history of science. And I would say evolution is going to be one of those at some point where they'll look at it and say, that was just silly.
Isn't that what science is all about?
Exactly. Exactly.
Can we not question the assumptions of others
course.
and learn and
Of
grow?
course.
That's what it's all about.
And when you shut down discussion,
Yes.
that's no longer science. That's indoctrination.
Ah, okay.
So we always have to recognize, are we practicing science with free discussion, or are we shutting it down because we don't want to talk about it? Yeah.
And that's a good point.
So DNA we recognize is a double-stranded molecule. It has what I call a linear code. It's got its A and its T and its C and its G. Just like letters on a page form words, and the words form sentences, and the sentences form paragraphs, and that gives us a language convention we call English.
Okay.
DNA also has a linear code that gives us a language convention that would be part of the genetic code in our cells, explaining then how you have the hair color you have, you have the eye color you have. See, things that Darwin didn't understand. They knew nothing about DNA at the time of Darwin. This is key. You have to recognize that Darwin and his views had almost 100 years to become entrenched into the scientific community before we even understood what DNA was.
Okay.
So think about that. Almost 100 years to become entrenched before we even understood this. I've said many times that Darwin came along now and presented his ideas, he'd be laughed off the stage.
Yes.
But because it's so entrenched, then we're not questioning Darwin, or at least the basic concepts of evolution. What we're doing is we're trying to make them fit, trying to
Okay.
somehow mash them in there.
Wow.
So here's what we have that's a major problem. All right, let's look at this linear code.
Okay.
So they say with the linear code in genetics, we have letters, the A, T, C, G. They form words, which in genetics we call them codons. They form sentences, which in genetics we call open reading frames. They form punctuations, which would be like promoters and stop codons and termination sites, and paragraphs, which you call genes. See, so it has a similarity to our English language as far as its linear code. Okay, but here is what I'd say the first problem.
Okay.
All right. Walter Gilbert in 1992 said that in computer terms, humans are really very simple. You can put all our information on one CD.
Okay.
And that's where that kind of thinking took us.
Right.
At Darwin's time, they determined that cells were very, very simple. Therefore, it's not that big a deal to not only for cells to originate, to form on their own, but then to transform, to become a fish, and a fish become a reptile become a mammal. It's not that difficult because they view things as very simple.
Like little bags of enzymes.
Yeah, that's what they
basically.
called them, in fact, like bags of enzymes.
Okay.
See, so like I say, you had almost 100 years for this mindset to set in before we really began to understand stuff.
Yes.
But see, even in 1992, Gilbert should have known better. But this shows us how that kind of thinking gets us off track. Because when we want to keep it simple, then that allows a better framework for evolution to occur.
Yeah.
Okay.
But basically what he was doing, he's saying, if we just read the genetic code in a linear fashion like this, it'll all fit on a CD.
Pull
There
out
you
a
go.
CD, here's a human.
Yeah.
Everything you are is on that CD.
Okay.
That's nonsense.
Okay.
We knew it in 1992, but now we really know that is absolute nonsense because among other things, you see, as I said, at this time it seemed very plausible because it was very simple, supposedly. So it seemed very plausible for that to occur. Okay, but now we recognize that we got to go way beyond the linear code.
Okay.
DNA is actually a three-dimensional molecule. So it's not just a flat page. You got to bend that page. You got to curve that page. And you don't read it just in one direction. You read it in multiple directions.
Oh, wow.
You read it, you turn that page over, read it again, you fold it, read it again, fold it, and read it again. See, and it's not only three-dimensional, it's in a four-dimension dynamic. In other words, because when you fold it, you change the informational content. The fourth dimension being time, so every time you fold it over time, you see the information changes. Every time you fold it, that's different information. So it's three-dimensional read in a four-dimensional dynamic.
Yes.
Okay. Well, what language convention do humans have that's three-dimensional read in a four-dimensional dynamic? There's none.
No.
No. In fact, this is so far beyond any language convention we have, but that's what DNA is.
Okay.
All right. So in 2007, the statement was made that these observations, some of the ones I just referred to, these observations suggest that genomic architecture is not collinear
Okay.
It's interweaved and modular, and the same genomic sequences are multifunctional. Can you imagine in a book if a word had 3 different meanings at the same time?
Yeah.
In the context of the sentence, and if the sentence had 3 different meanings at the same time in the context of the paragraph, and the paragraph had 3 different meanings at the same time in the context of the page, can you imagine that kind of language?
Right.
But that's what we see with DNA.
Yes. And this is just, we're now finding out
We're now
how complex
just
it is.
beginning to really get an understanding, not of it per se, but an understanding that we don't understand. Yeah.
Like what you're seeing? You can find so much more on the Creation Superstore. You'll find over 900 books and videos on origin science, creation, and Bible history. Whether you're looking for nature documentaries, educational books, homeschool resources, or children's videos, we've got it all, so be sure to head over and check it out. Use the promo code to receive 10% off your first order.
Chromosome kissing. You didn't know chromosomes flirted with each other.
I did not.
We now understand that when we looked at the chromosome in its linear state, we say, well, this doesn't seem to be very functional right here. But what we didn't know is that you take a piece from another chromosome and they fold together to form the functional unit.
Oh,
See, so you can't just take that linear. You got to fold 2 pages together.
Okay.
Now you read it, not just the 1 page. All right. Another is that what we call epigenetics. This is changing the phenotype. Those physical features, your hair color, your eye color, the shape of your ears, the shape of your nose, those change many times not by altering the DNA sequence, but by other mechanisms that affect how the DNA is read. And this is called epigenetics. That's a field that's exploding in the last decade. And so we've now moved beyond just that linear sequence of DNA. We now have all of this non-genetic events occurring as well in the cell.
Okay.
So in 2014, Riva made the comment that the standard view has always been oversimplified.
Yes.
But its limitations today are more dramatically apparent than ever, and it's become clear that the overall picture is much more complex.
Wow.
And my challenge is, have you ever noticed that there's nothing that ever becomes less complex?
Right.
Remember Darwin and those who promoted Darwin and those that promoted evolution really through the 20th century always wanted to keep things as simple as possible because that's what allowed evolution to occur. But we're 21st century now. We need to move past that and get into science.
Yes.
Quit getting into the religion of evolution. Get into science. Science is telling us that this complexity has moved past anything that evolution can account for. You no longer can explain what we're seeing genetically by these standard interpretations of how evolution's supposed to have occurred, how these things are supposed to even come into existence to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. And you just called evolution a religion. You said
Yes.
the religion of evolution.
Yes.
When you think about it, and people get so upset when you say that. They say, we have the facts, we have everything on our side. And when you think about it, a lot of the tenets of evolution, of Darwinian evolution certainly, are taken by faith.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
cannot be observed. They're not repeatable in a lab. They're not, which means that, and they hold to them with ardor. That's the very definition of religion.
Even Jerry Cohn, one of the strongest advocates of evolution you're going to find in the world today, admitted that evolution on the ranking of scientific disciplines, evolution is way down there. He said closer to phrenology. You know what phrenology? That was the 19th century idea that the size and shape and the bumps in your skull would dictate your character, your personality. See, he said closer to phrenology than it would be like to chemistry or physics.
Wow.
So even he admitted it's just a lot of historical assumption and conjecture. And yet we're told, we get the face if we disagree. Here's what evolution, I would say, cannot begin to explain.
Okay.
And this is scientific fact. This isn't just conjecture making it up. I call it the book analogy.
Okay.
Let's take War and Peace,
Yeah.
2,000-page volume, but we're going to print it on 20 pages. Okay?
Oh,
But we're not
okay.
talking about teeny microscopic print. We're talking about regular sized print. But it's printed in such a way, see, this is not that linear code. It's that three-dimensional read in the fourth dimension. So you read it left, right, top to bottom, turn it over, read it again, then you fold a page, you fold another page, you fold another page, and you keep doing that so that what you have in the end is you've read the full novel, but it's just on the 20 pages.
In only 20 pages.
Now, here's the challenge. Would you know how to read that book?
No.
There's not a human alive that knows how to read that book.
No.
But here's the irony also. If we couldn't read it, we certainly wouldn't have any idea how to write it.
Okay.
And yet that book's been written. It's called The Human Chromosome.
Wow.
The Human Genome.
Yes.
So if that book's been written and it's beyond anything that we can even begin to put together, how would that have occurred? See, are we going to leave reality and say, well, somehow it wrote itself over millions of years? Or are we going to recognize that that is a clear indication of supreme intelligence? That the combined intelligence of all humans that ever lived still can't touch that.
Cannot capture that. And thousands of scientists are working on a daily basis trying to better understand just bits and snippets.
Genetics has moved to the point now where there's probably what I would call a semi-major discovery virtually every week and probably a major discovery virtually every month. There's not a single scientist out there today that can tell you everything we know. Clearly. And in fact, there's probably not even a committee that can tell everything we know. So it's really moved beyond the capacity of any individual groups of humans to know everything that we know about genetics. And it's only going to get a lot worse. And yet, see, the God of the Bible not only knows all this, but he's the one that put it together to begin with.
And then he gave us the intelligence to be able to try to comprehend some of these things.
To see, as Paul talked about in Romans, the clear evidence of the Creator. The clear evidence of the Creator.
That's exciting.
Okay, structural architecture. We see cells have a structural architecture that our technology can't even rival. We can't begin to build and do what cells do. Bacteria have little miniature motors that are so sophisticated that engineers have been working to duplicate them for decades and still can't do it.
Wow.
Okay. So was that built by a superior engineer, or was it somehow just a process that's self-assembled? See, it doesn't even make any sense. Okay, part of that self-assembly is that they have to self-assemble in a predetermined dimension. What predetermined it? Did it just predetermine itself?
Right.
Predetermined to me tells me purpose. Tells me design. That's what the very concept means.
It really does.
Exactly. So here we go. Here I find fascinating. The human, when we suffocate, the first thing that dies is our brain, because our brain has to have oxygen. You pull a drowning victim out, you're not worrying about resuscitating their muscles. It's the brain. But the mole rat has the ability of switching to oxygen-free metabolism in the brain using fructose. That's totally unique among all mammals. That is an extraordinary switch that has to occur. That's not a simple process. That's an extraordinary switch that has to occur. How in the world, when mammals were evolving, would most of the mammals be evolving without this, and all of a sudden the mole rat evolves it? See, that does, to me, again, that leaves the bounds of reality, because you're talking about an evolutionary transformation that would be nothing short of astounding.
You're saying in a low oxygen environment, he can
in
actually...
a zero oxygen environment.
And he switches something...
He can switch to ferment fructose in the brain.
To keep it going.
Right, so he doesn't suffocate the brain. Yes, exactly. It's like that is a tremendously sophisticated switch that occurs.
Absolutely.
That just somehow evolved in the process of the rest of us evolving brains that have to have oxygen.
Oh, incredible.
So what we see then is what I call God's fingerprint. And that is that when we look at all of this, in the cell, to move a molecule, to move some proteins, for example, from one point in the cell to another, from point A to point B, they just don't float around until they get there randomly. They are specifically moved by a transport system. In fact, the transport system's a little walker, looks kind of like a Star Wars walker. And it just carries these to that particular destination in the cell. Now, how does it know where to go? That package that it's carrying actually has a address label on it. We don't understand fully that address label, but it tells this little walker, go over here, not over here. Go there, not there.
to transport the information.
To me, those are what I call fingerprints of God.
Yes.
You don't self-assemble those things.
No.
Those predetermined. They designate purpose. They designate a design structure.
Yes.
I find it ironic that my fellow biologist will look at something in space, straining to see if there's design to it to indicate if ET's out there trying to communicate with us, failing to look at applying the very same paradigm, the very same algorithm they're trying to detect intelligence out there to here, and failing to see it. You can clearly look in the human body. If you can't see intelligence in the human body, you'll never be able to see intelligence anywhere because you're just denying that it even exists.
That's what Romans tells us. It says it's clearly seen.
Yes, exactly.
And the technology
in fact,
is
they
just...
have to intentionally deny.
Okay.
Because it's so clear. Richard Dawkins said that we look at what appears to be design. Francis Crick of Crick-Watson fame, who was very
DNA.
Outspoken atheist, said that biologists have to continue to tell themselves that it's not design.
Wow.
Well, what's that tell you? In other words, we're taking the obvious interpretation and we're ignoring that.
Yes.
We're taking the fingerprint of God and we're pushing it aside, not because of scientific justification, but because that's just simply not what we want the information, the evidence to tell us.
To hear. Now, that makes perfect sense because we were told from the beginning there was a serpent. The serpent beguiled Eve. It said, hath God said, you can be as gods. You can know what's right.
Yes.
You can choose for yourself, basically.
Yes.
And that's human nature. We want to
That's our sinful
ourselves.
nature. Yes,
that's our sinful nature.
Yeah.
But we can't. We can't choose for ourselves. We do have a creator, and he is evident. He has placed all of this around us, and genetics is just a perfect
We
example.
can deceive ourselves of saying we're being all scientific,
Right.
but we're not really. We're just fooling ourselves. We're offering conjecture. We're offering interpretations based upon our conjecture and calling it science and denying the fingerprint of God, denying the real science. When the paradigm drives the interpretation, that's no longer science.
No.
And that's why we see the paradigm of evolution is driving the interpretation so that you're forced to interpret strictly within the context of evolution. But that's not science. And so I would accuse the evolutionist community of not, they've kind of stopped practicing science and they're really just promoting their religion.
Absolutely. Okay, so the Bible tells us very plainly. You wrote a book called The Who of Creation Answered. It's not intelligence designed by aliens up in a distant planet. It is the God of the Bible.
It is the God of the Bible, absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here. We're completely out of time, but we'll have to have you back on a future program.
My pleasure.
All right. You know, we've learned that not long ago, people assumed that cells were simple bags of enzymes and that spontaneous generation and evolution have gotten us where we are today. But now we know that even 21st century technology pales in comparison to the technology of a living cell. Now that means that there is amazing design in you right now. God has placed His fingerprint on you, and He's given you a unique DNA code that makes you one of a kind. Now there's bad news and there's good news. The bad news is that all of those cells are going to die one day. You'll die with it. The good news is that our Savior has made a way, and He will transform this mortal body. He can wash away your sins, and He is calling you today. Have you answered? Now we hope that you've been encouraged and educated today, and we want to give you the tools that you need to boldly go forward and share what you've learned. So leave us questions and comments on our Facebook page and give us a call to learn more. I'm David Reeves, and until our next time, keep looking up. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Hello, I'm David Reeves, host of the TV show Creation in the 21st Century on TBN. Each week we talk to some of the world's leading scientists, all showing how our Creator, the God of the Bible, has left a pattern of His fingerprints throughout the universe. Engage with other like-minded believers through the Creation Club, a place for biblical creationists to share and learn. This fast-growing website offers over 1,000 articles written by authors from many different backgrounds, already encompassing 6 different languages. Combating the unproven theories of evolution, our 24/7 TV network reaches millions of people with biblical truth. Genesis Science Network broadcasts globally over the internet, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, mobile devices, and more. It's a new Christian alternative to the evolutionary programming so prevalent on TV today. Be sure to sign up for our email updates and like us on Facebook for weekly inspiration and education regarding science and the Bible. Talk to your pastor about sponsoring one of our live events in your church or community.